Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam.
And in this episode, we're delving yet further into Mark Lawrence's The Book That Wouldn't Burn, as we discuss chapters 36 to 52. So hold tight for romance and ancient mysteries that transcend prejudices, as we try to unpick the wheres, the wherefores, the whens, the whats, and the whos of the seemingly endless shelves of the library. Okay, episode 8, and we are back with The Book That Wouldn't Burn, with chapters 36 to 52, a serious public health warning about spoilers for this episode, because
Definitely.
we got some major plot twists.
Huge revelations.
So, I think before we go any further, shall I hand over to you, Sam, and you give us a little bit of an overview of what we've covered in the last few chapters?
Let me run through this epic and dramatic plot summary. Livira, when we last left her, had to flee from the escape that had pushed her back through the portal, which then took over the body of an assistant. She narrowly survives and protects the Raven, but the infected assistant remains at large somewhere within the library. 3 years pass, and the city grows ever more technologically advanced, while the political and military standoff with the Sabers grows even tenser. Livira is summoned by Yute and brought before King Oenold to be made a full librarian, which causes an uproar amongst the aristocracy. Lord Algar threatens Yute and Livira, and, on the way back, perhaps unsurprisingly, they are attacked by an expensive assassin called Janakar. Malar, who was with them, kills the assassin by exploiting her arrogance, but not before he is seriously wounded in the process. That night, while Malar recovers, Yute talks to Livira about his motivation for promoting her and his desire to stop the cycle of destruction that is caused by the knowledge contained in the library. Jumping to Evar, he's wandering through a city of centuries past, which is besieged by Sabers. He enjoys seeing the people, but his enjoyment is turned to ash as the Sabers breach the city and a full-on assault begins. Distraught at the carnage, he walks away. The years move on for Livira, and she goes further into adulthood. She thinks often of Evar and longs for him. Her job is to return books that have been used for copying, and she uses this as an opportunity to explore the library further. She seeks out more books about the library, but finds much of the crucial information has been censored. Tired of so many dead ends, Livira resolves to break into the head librarian's apartments. She is successful, despite almost being rumbled by the head librarian, and finds the book she needs in her private library. But she also attracts the interest of the oldest library guide, a large black dog called Valente. After finding out from the book that they need to use the blood of an assistant to form a pool, Livira and Arpix set off into the library with their newfound companion and use their smarts to find a way to make a new portal and get to Evar. Evar and Livira are reunited when Evar returns from the besieged city. It has been years for Livira, but only a day for Evar. Arpix has not ended up in the same space as Livira, but she decides to search for him later. Instead, she chooses to explore a portal with Evar. They emerge in front of a giant stone wolf head, which is carved around one of the entrances to the library. Some sort of ceremony appears to have just taken place. There are hordes of assistants filing back into the library. In front of them are two pools from which have emerged two small people. They follow the footprints towards the city, discover they can fly when they're in ghost form, and begin to explore the city and then share a romantic moment. However, reality comes flooding in when they find out the population of the city has only recently been eradicated in a brutal Saber attack that seemingly eliminated both sides. They start to head back to the exchange, but not before Livira briefly spots a small, entirely white child. However, the moment they return, a Saber attacks. It's Clovis. And Livira realizes that Evar and his siblings were actually Sabers all along.
Whoa.
She flees back through her portal, but not before Clovis dives after her, wounding her. She arrives back to find Arpix has been using the portal to gather important books for their research. Still reeling from the revelation about Evar, Livira tries to process her anger and the other conflicting emotions. She visits Yute, who reveals that he and Yamaha share the same origin. Evar and Clovis watch Livira for a short while as ghosts before Clovis drags him back to their siblings to tell them what's happened. The assistant in their time shuts off the portal, but while Evar pines for Livira, his siblings decide they also want to come with him into the exchange, each with their own aims in mind. What was it? 3/4 of the way through that description, we get the huge thing. Evar, well, they're all Sabbers, really, aren't they?
Yeah.
If you think about it.
It's semantics. Shock horror in the book about the library. It's all about interpretation of words. Did you get any sense that that was coming?
Only just before. When Livira's talking about expectation. Because they're in the city that just before, when they're both as ghosts. And there's just so much foreshadowing, like really building it up. Evar says to her, almost everything about you changes each time I meet you. Your clothes, your hair, your height. Now, we put this down to the fact that she's aged each time, and also at one point her hair was bleached through a chemical attack. But, when you suddenly reflect back on that, it's so obvious. And the whole thing, like, it makes sense where every single time he's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Livira, idiot. And we're like, what is this? How is this guy not remembering it? How has she changed that much in the few intervening years?
And then once she says that, all of a sudden he recognizes her because the expectation comes in. Yeah, there was a moment when it first came up much earlier in the book. This is when I think Livira's first getting into reading a lot, and she realizes that the word Sabba just means enemy. And there was a moment there where I was like, well, that's not a description of a species or a race. That's just a frame of mind or a perception of someone. So I have to say, I'm not trying to claim that I saw it coming or anything, but you look back and it's obviously done very well where you go, oh yeah, all of that stuff now makes totally different meaning.
When the moment actually happened, when you had like Clovis steaming towards them, it's described as, oh, it's a Sabba, and Evar smashes into them. I really enjoyed the fact that I must have been so in tune with Livira, like her hatred of Sabbers, as much as like we keep getting these things of like, Sabbers are way more cultured, but it's that expectation. In your mind, you're thinking, Evar's a human. Of course he is.
I loved the twist. I think there's some obvious directions that then takes us in. Gives a whole new dimension to the whole cross-generational interaction.
You also want to doubt yourself and go like, well, where does the projection stop? Because, there's kind of projections that exist within the library. How do we know there's not going to be another revelation where suddenly like, Clovis and Evar might be Sabbers because of their skills? What if one of their siblings has always been just projected as a Sabba to them, in fact they're human? I'm doubting everything now.
Yeah.
Because if they're selecting children from across time, why would they only choose one species?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a whole other bunch of kids who got spat out at another time who were of, another species.
Yeah. I guess not exactly linked to that, but I had a question now about the assistant and the soldier, and are they in the form of Sabbers? Because I'm guessing you, like me, you've imagined these as humanoid. And then in extension to that question, because we now have this idea that the city has sort of passed between what we're calling Sabba control and human control over generations, have the assistants and soldiers then been changing to reflect the expectation? Or are they physically changing to adapt to the inhabitants?
They kind of like, schlomp off the side of a mechanism and take a different form. But also, the stuff about the projection is really interesting, because just before they have the revelation, and they're going through this city that's been devastated by an attack, and we're looking at it from Livira's perspective. And I feel like Evar was starting to catch on then, because from the way Livira described it, it was the humans had been in the city, and Evar's people had attacked. Because, like, Livira is saying, oh, they're monsters, look what they've done. And Evar just says, I don't understand what happened here, because he might be seeing his people potentially as the aggressors at that point. Yeah. Like, I know that, like, Mark Lawrence is intentionally keeping it ambiguous. Like, people locked in fights and they're all dying around each other, so it's hard to tell who had the city. But just because we're having it from Livira's perspective, it seems interesting that, when you go back and have a little look again, Evar is kind of going, oh, were we the bad guys here? A little bit. At least that's what I read into that line.
There was a moment in that bit where they were sort of going through that house where they'd found all of the dead people and families, and there were humans and there were Sabbers. The way it talked about the humans and Sabbers being together, I had a moment where I was like, is this a moment in time where actually humans and Sabbers lived actually peacefully together, and someone's attacked the concept of that and destroyed it?
The third race, maybe, but they're not there. So maybe they've just...
Or like what one of the humans and Sabbers has decided, has said like, oh, we disagree with, living in harmony. There's always people that are anti-integration, but perhaps I was getting carried away with my own version of where the story could go.
So yeah, I mean, we're going to learn more about how these projections work when you have a whole group of the Sabbers. I really feel bad saying that now because that's the term for enemy.
Yeah, I feel like we should have a new name for their species.
Maybe by the end of this book we will.
Dogmen doesn't seem politically correct.
Also seems, very pejorative. What should we move on to next?
I think Yute and Yamala are the big other question for me now.
So, Yute and Yamala, both with Y starting names. So that's a link there. They're the white children from the city, right?
That's definitely the feeling that we're getting, isn't it? That's definitely where Livira is heading with her line of questioning in
just before
the last
finish,
chapter. She's like, was that the first time you saw me on the steps to the allocation hall?
You get some stuff really laid on thick when you go back and have a little reread of some of the scenes. Just after Malar is healing and Livira is sleeping off in the room, and Yute comes in and it says, in the lamplight, he looked ghostly white, like something apart from the world, as if he weren't part of humanity at all, something closer to an assistant than to a man like Malar. She wondered about that. Yute and the head librarian, recently rumoured to be his equally pale sister. It's like, okay, fine.
Yeah, and obviously we still don't know very much at all about Yamala, but I think the pieces are there in terms of them having gone back to this moment where two ghostly white children,
because we haven't seen Yamala really. We've just seen her long white hair, or even a mane, perhaps. We've only seen the back of her, and we've seen a white arm briefly.
Oh, so are you thinking maybe she is a Sabber?
I'm curious about whether that is like the fact that we haven't seen her and she's been kept so hidden. And even when we do see it, it's intentionally vague again.
So the other part where she comes into this that obviously we don't get to see firsthand as a reader is after Livira's been promoted to a librarian at that ceremony, the king is obviously furious and says he's summoning the head librarian, which obviously we later find out is Yamala. She must be like significantly powerful, because that kind of blows over as far as we're aware as a reader, because obviously Yute says to the king, sorry mate, you actually don't have power over this, but he's the king, and obviously I would have thought being leaned on or had pressure applied on you by the king would potentially have some consequences, and so it indicates that Yamala as the head librarian is
that's how essential
really,
the library
really powerful.
Yeah, it's like seemingly on par with the king. We've talked about this in previous books, but again, we're seeing this almost like church and state kind of thing, but it's state and science or knowledge.
Well, it is kind of the church, because multiple times they refer to the library as almost like a religion or like a faith, or something that people place their faith in. So I think it is almost directly an equivalent to that church and state relationship.
Talking about how the old entrances of the library used to be treated like entrances to a temple. We've seen these temple-like areas in previous times past. So that's how it's been treated.
Actually, the parallels, when you think about it, the way that in the real world, senior people in religions throughout history have controlled access to information and the interpretation of the scripture in the same way that the librarians do in the library.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder as well, like, they're doing that for the king, for his political aims. If their library is as independently powerful from the king as we kind of get the sense here, then why are they doing that? Especially if Yamala's working with Yute to try and end this, or do they now have different aims? You know, they're copying these books, and that's seemingly propelling along this inevitable path towards destruction again. Why would Yamala engage in that? Or are they intentionally just like trying to slow it down, as we know Yute is trying to do?
Yeah, that is interesting, and whether that does lead to a state of conflict between the library and the crown.
Yeah. So with his aging and his existence through time, so if he is some kind of new version of assistant that gets made, like the kind of half mortal, half assistant, you know, Livira was certain that the white child could see her as a ghost. So you saw Evar and Livira back in the past, and has been kind of like working towards bringing them together, trying to make it happen.
I would assume that he's seen a human and a Saba, you know, being friends, flying around the city, exploring, whatever. Maybe he's just like over-egged that a little bit, and it's like they didn't know.
It's like, oh, love between two young people of different species.
Yeah.
I can make this happen.
Yeah, so that's the question going around in my head at the moment. It feels like you were just saying, like, has he just been waiting for thousands of years to meet Livira again?
And also, how long has Yamala been head librarian, really? Because they talked about previous head librarians. They say Yamala's been it for ages. Has this just been the culmination of loads and loads of work to get her into that position?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Or whether they have been very good at being puppet masters, pulling the strings of what's going on. Or whether because they exist maybe outside of time, like other assistants, are they able to just bide their time in periods of time where it's not important for them to be there? And because there's talk of sort of suspicious deaths of previous head librarians, isn't there? And I wonder whether actually there's something to do with that, and it's like, well, now's the time where I need to be head librarian. So sorry, mate.
They're no longer working for the greater purpose. They're like, well, sorry,
you're about to disappear in the library.
Yeah, I wonder if you would be willing to do that, or maybe Yamala was always the one who did that. And also, what's to do with Yute's daughter then?
Yeah. Like that hadn't come into my head actually.
Because she's a very absent figure. Was it a child between him and Yamala? Was it an adopted daughter? Is she actually dead, or is it something else has happened to her?
Yeah. I hadn't thought about her for a little while, actually. I guess once we've started to have this revelation that perhaps Yute and Yamala are these sort of timeless beings, you stop thinking of them as humans. And then to find out he had a daughter. But who's to say it wasn't an adopted daughter that he took in and then she's disappeared?
Yeah, I mean, he clearly has a lot of empathy. So, you know, he's not like detached from humanity.
He's obviously hanging around at the allocation stairs, just taking in strays.
Just milling around, you know.
A little bit sinister, actually. When you think about
don't worry, he does this all the time. It's fine.
Yeah. It's all in the tone of voice that you tell the story in.
So, in terms of dodginess, how do you feel about Evar and Livira's relationship? You know, he first saw her 2-3 days before as a child, and suddenly he's fallen in love with her. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's definitely accelerated.
When they finally kissed, I was just like, I saw it coming. I knew it was happening, but I still, on reflection, felt that, well, you just saw her as a 9-year-old a few days ago. And, you know, she's become quite obsessed with you over the many years that she's been out in the world, and you're not really processing that. You know, you're just like so hankering after this woman you love from the book. You're just putting that on her.
Yeah. In his defense, he's got these suppressed, locked away memories that he's had this kind of love relationship with this woman. So he's tapping into that rather than developing a love relationship over the course of just, you know, a couple of days. that's the way I kind of thought about it, was like, it's a natural thing because it's happened before.
Yeah, and if the book that he had something from Livira's writing in it, what's to say that he didn't, like, when he was in the mechanism, he was
almost in her reality,
like
and
living their relationship that she described in the book.
So this, slightly tangentially, but stick with me and challenge me if I don't tie it back together.
I'll go in with an open mind.
I had this question, and it's in no way fully formed as a theory, but what if the soldier and the assistant are Yute and Yamaha, and they've had this almost plan to get Evar into the mechanism with Livira's book in order to sort of generate that superpower around the ability to love in spite of our differences, and
but then how do they
species,
get that back into the past? Like, these are people seemingly trapped, unconnected from all the rest of the time.
These are the questions we've got to find out the answers to, aren't they? Yute's sort of super optimistic aspiration around two species that have literally spent millennia just destroying each other. If one relationship between a human and a Saba is going to fix that, it's going to have to be pretty special. What do you think of the Yute and Yamaha thing? Because it just popped into my head.
I would like it if it was true, because it does kind of like tie it all back in together. But when Evar hovers over the soldier and gets all those flashes of like violence, that doesn't say Yute to me. I mean, it could be him flashing through all the times that he's killed head librarians for not playing ball.
Or it could be the fact that he's lived through societies just destroying each other over and over and over again throughout millennia.
But I go back to my counter crackpot theory, which is that it's Malar, because he almost swore at Evar. He's like, everything's fucked. And then it cut back and the soldier went back to his normal programming. So, like, with the fact that there was a cuss word in there makes me think it's Malar. Especially because Malar's still in the blooming story. He's still hanging around. Yeah. And, so that's why I can't get on board with your Yamaha theory, because I think it's Malar, and now also I'm going to throw out there the assistant's salamander.
Yeah.
That's my counter.
That feels like a major stretch, but it could be. Just, we haven't come across anything that so far talks about the idea of uploading your consciousness as a human into being an assistant or transforming. And that doesn't mean that we won't.
I'm really enjoying the depth that's been given to the assistants and the guides of the library, because it could easily have been you had the soldier and the assistant and that was it. But now you've got all these different levels of the mythology. It just seems so vast. And, the one with the massive wings who was speaking the Sabatine tongue, and that was really cool. And again, the indicator who was like, let me cycle through some of my common languages, and never gets to Livira's and gets to the Saba one way before.
Yeah, did that give an impression of how many inhabitants of Crate City there had been, like, even prior to the Sabas having dominion over it?
Yeah, it exactly sets that out. He's just going, oh, well, let me try some of my more common languages. And that's how many times, like, this huge, like, incomprehensible history that's gone on with this library. It was so cool.
So the Raven is called Ed Garland.
Well, Edgar Allan.
Edgar
Allan. It's Edgar Allan. It's Edgar Allan Poe. It's the Raven, nevermore.
So in the audiobook, the narrator pronounces it Edgar Allan.
Okay, when you see it written out, it's Edgar Allan.
Like two words?
No, it's just all in one, but it's so clear. That's so interesting that they potentially, but they purposely hide it from you in the audiobook. Like, you just read it and you're like, oh, okay, Edgar Allan. Yeah, I get it. Raven, nevermore.
Well, that makes perfect sense. But I was like, is it like Ed Garland? Like, his name's Edward Garland or something like that. And I was like, what a strange thing for a Raven to have a surname. Like, all right, Ed.
Please. Mr. Garland was my father. Call me Ed. Yeah, it's again, it's a literary reference to something that ties back. And, Valente, he's seemingly vastly powerful. He can pass through walls, which is even beyond the Raven, Ed Garland. He can produce raven feathers at will, just cough them up. His concussive bark knocks people over. And it's strong enough to wake up this old assistant. Like, I kind of don't even want him to ever venture into explaining how he works as a guide, because I feel like it would destroy the magic.
There's something good-natured about them. It feels like they don't want to cause anyone any harm, but it's like, my priority is the books. But there's also this thing about Livira having the ability to interact with them and connect with them in a way that I'm not sure that other people would have. Or do you think it's just the fact that she's willing to risk it that enables her to?
Because there could be some element of destiny, but the way that Mark Lawrence has written Livira's character, I'm equally willing to believe that she's just a good problem solver, and she just actually asks questions. They've said that multiple times. She's inquisitive. I mean, Valente, if my Latin is correct, actually means something like willing or wishing. So it automatically implies that he's a friendly presence. But we know there's mention of assistants who are a threatening presence, like some people have been killed. Are they all ones that have been infected by escapes, or were there different ones where they were more of a kind of guardian protector role? And also, when the assistant gets taken over by the escape and turns like black or grey and said, "Jaspeth wants you, child."
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
So Jaspeth is one of the brothers who fell out about the...
Jaspeth and Irad. He's the one who tore down the knowledge, I think.
Yeah, so he's the anti-knowledge one.
Yeah.
Irad is the one who wanted to build the knowledge, and they reached an uneasy compromise, which Yute goes into further about the story, and Livira's saying, but you don't believe that's true, do you? And he's like, not true, but it's representative, I think are his words. So... does that mean that Jaspeth is existing outside of time as well? Because presumably Jaspeth at this point is ancient history.
It's almost like the name evokes the sense of wanting to tear down. So when they say Jaspeth wants you, does it just mean I'm going to send you to hell?
The thing I've been thinking is, obviously there's lots of references to Adam and Eve and knowledge as sin. And I wonder actually whether we're heading in that direction, where actually... the library's greatest curse is knowledge. It
might be far off, because that's one of Yute's whole things. Is like, by not controlling the knowledge, by giving it out too freely, it leads to destruction.
Yeah.
So how much is Yute actually kind of going, whoa, yeah, Irad built the library and that's great, but maybe Jaspeth had a point?
Maybe the compromise they made is the curse then. So it's the worst of both worlds, and it leads to this inevitable cycle of violence. But I do wonder whether that's going to become more of a prominent thing with Jaspeth, whether he is this mastermind operating outside time, sending out his minions and escapes to try and influence people, or whether actually he needs to get people like Livira, because they came after Evar and that one said his name at the very beginning, and now it's talked to Livira specifically and said Jaspeth wants you. Does Jaspeth want Evar as well? Is that what that first one was about to say? And is there some more kind of weird, like outside of time and different dimension stuff going on there?
I just don't think it's going to end with the mechanism and the exchange.
No.
Like you're obviously going to have access to another thing with a name that's very similar. It could be where Jaspeth is in one of those ones. Where they go and get rid of books or something, I don't know. But the fact that the exchange is such a pleasant one, where it's like, oh, it's about, exchanging books between realities, and it's so proactive and functional. It almost feels like there has to be an opposite.
Yeah, so we've got a quarter of the book left. Where do you think we're heading?
I'm really worried this is going to be another trilogy where they don't close enough stuff off at the end of this book. But if it was be nicely sealed off at the end of this book, ready for another chapter in the tale with the second book. I would want Livira and Evar to be in the same time, physically touching. Clovis to have stormed off, and she'll have her character growth in the next book when she comes to deal with them. That'll be kind of an antagonistic thing in the second book. But I want Livira and Evar to be together and have overcome their prejudices. And there's the big, now we go off together as a unified pairing to solve the problems. But there's a big threat coming, and Yute's here too. What do you think?
And Yute's here too.
I'm here too.
That's like something from Rick and Morty. It stumps me every time I try and think about it because all of my theories are sort of half-baked. And so I've been kind of playing this thing around in my head where is Mayland and Jaspeth somehow linked together?
Oh, of course, Mayland, yeah.
With the escapes. But then once I start trying to play it through, I'm like, no self-respecting author would ever write this story.
For me, it just feels like there's going to be more revelations in this last quarter of the book. You know, we're going to have some other big twists. Will there be another place like the Exchange that they'll uncover? And they're like, well, off we go. Will they have a certain portal? They're like, well, this is the one we're going through, and this is going to lead us to the truth about what happens in the future. And we're going to just commit to the fact that both of us will be trapped in the future for forever and can never go back.
So the one thing that seems imminent is that Sabbers seem to be about to attack the city in Livira's time. So there's this moment of reckoning for whether Yute can slow them down or put what seems to be his, like you were saying, 4D chess plan into action with Livira and Evar, I don't know, to somehow bring that to a halt and enter negotiations.
Yeah, and I feel like with the assistant and the soldier, I don't know if we're going to have resolution with them yet because they're about to leave them. So unless we're about to get it now, just before they head off, then I feel like that's going to be another open question by the end of this book. There just isn't enough time to answer all my questions.
Yeah.
I've got like a few final thoughts as well about other stuff. So Yute mentions the fire limit. He says like, you know, he feels there's a point where they get too much knowledge and it takes them down. I feel like that's kind of linked to the Fermi paradox, the idea that this is why we've never met extraterrestrial intelligent life, because every single civilization reaches a certain point where they kill themselves. And it feels like the library offers people each time a launching point to get past the Fermi paradox, and each time they've failed and fallen down. Wentworth, the cat, I think they're a robot.
Yeah, guide. Definite guide.
Yeah, guide, because they aren't dying, and they should have, because they're a cat. Maybe future cats live longer, but I doubt it.
Maybe. I mean, what time period have we covered now? Like at least 9 years. No, 8? We did 2 years, then 3 years, then another 3 years, didn't we?
Since the start of the book.
Yeah, since we first met.
Livira is like 20-something now.
I think she's 20.
Yeah, I think she was like 9, so I think it's been like 11 years or something like that since she first...
Maybe 11. I thought she was 11 when she was first there, and then it was 2. She skipped 2 years, then 3 years, then 3 years, and that's where we're at now. So I think like we're around 8 or 9 years, and I don't think Wentworth was a young cat. But yeah, I'm getting that impression as well. I think there's too much description of Wentworth for him not to be in some way relevant.
The guinea pig. What was the guinea pig doing in the Exchange?
Was there a guiney pig in the Exchange?
There was like, what about that one? There was a guinea pig over there, and I was like, what? And no one's. They never come back to it.
Sorry, I was getting mixed up with the mechanism, but yeah.
So there's clearly other animal guides. I assume one is a guinea pig, and that is such a just a useless guide. Okay, tiny animal, let's go. Come on. So those are my final thoughts on things that I've read in this section.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got any last other questions?
No, the only other thing that's in my head is that this book is called The Book That Wouldn't Burn. And so far, I'm at a loss for what that book that wouldn't burn is going to be, or whether that's some kind of metaphor for something else, whether it's one of these books. Obviously, the Darkness book. There's the book that's got the message we think from Livira in, or is there some, Livira's almost been writing her own autobiography on the inside cover of all of these books scattered around the library, and is that going to become the book that Evar takes into the mechanism with him at some point in the future? But what does it mean? What does the fact that it wouldn't burn mean, and that kind of thing? That's a question that's in my head. So loads of questions still to be answered, and loads of potential for it to go in tons of different directions once you bring in time and dimensional travel.
Just, I feel like the exchange has barely been touched upon. There's so much stuff that can happen there, and I'm so excited. Like, more realities, more times. But I guess the strength of it lies in how little we're shown, because it's what we don't see and we fill in with our minds, and that's the exciting thing. But I can't wait to see where this book goes. I'm absolutely loving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to hear from listeners of the podcast what they think in terms of what they've made of some of our theories, any theories of your own, where you think it's going, what you like, what you don't like. Everything's open to discussion. So in the last episode, we encouraged you to reach out with your comments about the books and to give us your views, and delighted to say that a couple of people have done that, and we're going to read those comments out.
What does this first one say?
So first comment is Raz the Reader on Instagram, who commented that she thought our wrap-up of The Foxglove King was awesome, but she says she hopes that we're having better luck with Mark Lawrence because she's having a bit of a hard time with it. It got a good review, but she's not as into it as she thought she would be. So at the time of writing, she was about to start chapter 5, and she said, is she judging too soon? I think we've probably both got a similar answer to this question, haven't we, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke about in the first episode about how bleak I thought the opening was and how it was really tough, really hard going. But I feel like there's such a purpose to that opening to set up that bleakness, because Livira's having a terrible time and the Sabbers are treating her so badly. And so it makes you really want to side with her when she continues to hate Sabbers for so long. It really has an intentional purpose to be put there as a kind of contrast to the rest of the book, because you're just like, man, what a horrible life she had. And then suddenly it all comes into full color, from like these browns and grays into the buzzing world of the city, and everything just comes to life, but it also just gets a whole lot more complicated.
Yeah, I think it was particularly bleak, and it reflected the kind of dusty, barren world that she was growing up in. But hope that you did stick with it. I would suggest sticking with it because we're really enjoying it. I think you can probably tell from these last few episodes. So when you catch up, let us know what you think. And our second comment that I want to read out is from Nikki_R01, also on Instagram. And this is in relation to the Foxglove King. So we're going to have to...
Oh, boy.
We're going to have to think back a little bit. But really interesting comment. So she says, hello. Does anyone else feel like Gabe was really quite dense about Law and her powers and how different she is to him and others who use Mortem? Also, totally agree with Law being a useless spy. They could have missed the whole shenanigans of looking for the bodies if she had linked the whole bodies for a war thing with her weird conversation with the Revenant in the catacombs at the beginning of the book. Which I hadn't thought of. It told her they were all lined up for the war. Kind of feel like a good spy would have added that to the information in the back of her head. That said, I did enjoy the book and listening along to your opinions too. So thank you very much for that, Nikki.
Oh, thank you.
What do you think to that? So first on Gabe.
Yeah, Gabe. I mean, he spent too long just being offended by her presence. He was in denial about it for ages and not really questioned the fact that she could just easily raise horses from the dead. And he's like, yeah, okay. And then suddenly he's like, you're a knight, sister? Oh my goodness. Oh, I hate it. Oh, I hate it so much. And I feel like it was kind of set up, his stupidity, just to have that revelation in the later part of the book.
So my thinking, and I think we did probably have a bit of a conversation about this, whether he's being dense or whether he's just such a misogynist that he doesn't want to encourage her to develop those powers and kind of learn about what her potential is.
Yeah, he's so blinded by doctrine, to be more forgiving to the book. There is an element of him just being focused on, this is my task, I'm doing this for Anton, and it's all going to be great.
If it's a character flaw of him to be a super, let's call it traditionalist in terms of how we might understand religion in the real world, then perhaps the idea of a powerful woman, even if it's subconscious, it's just something that he's not going to enable. I'd have to go back and reread the bit with the Revenant, because I totally missed the fact that the Revenant talks about saying that the bodies are lined up for war or something.
Yeah, I hadn't clocked about that because I was too busy focused on the fact that she didn't need to go through the catacombs. You know, she was just like, oh, let me pop in. Oh, there's Revenant here. I'm back out. Right, let me go into the streets. Oh, it's so crowded.
Yeah.
I was more focused on that. So it kind of, for me, I kind of must have dismissed it because I thought, well...
You thought it was just a clumsy sort of plot mechanism rather than a clue to
establishing a bit of what the city was like, the catacombs were like. Yeah. It's like, oh, there's dodgy ghouls in there. Ooh. And then she just backs out again.
But great comment, Nikki. And we just love hearing from people who are reading along. And even if you're reading along a few weeks behind us, we still want you to jump on. If you want to send us a message on Instagram or go back and find an Instagram post that was about that book that we were reading, wherever you leave your comment, we'll try and read it out and respond to it. Slight disclaimer, as you might figure out by the way we're doing this, we obviously do record episodes a little bit ahead of when they get published.
Just to behind the curtain.
I know, yeah, it's how the sausage is made, but we have to do that in order to be able to edit and get them up in time. So that does mean that there might be a slight lag between what we're talking about and what your comment's about, but that doesn't mean we'll enjoy it any less. So do what Raz and Nikki have done. Get in touch on Instagram, or if you want to find us on Facebook or TikTok or YouTube, just search at Escapists Anonymous Pod and you'll find us there. Wherever you listen to your podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a review. That really helps us out. Mm-hmm. And if you want to recommend us to any friends you've got that are fans of fantasy books, we'd really appreciate that as well. And that helps us to grow.
And also, if you want to recommend us a book for future reading, if there's one that you really want to have a read of and you want to know what our opinions are as well, send us a message and we'll add it into our schedule.
Indeed. So in the next episode, we will be finishing the book that wouldn't burn. So we are going chapter 53 all the way through to the end. Mm-hmm. So do your reading, make sure that we're not giving you any spoilers in the next episode, and we look forward to rejoining you then. So all that's left to say is goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.